Hi folks, Annette Evans back here with On Her Own, and I've got Lee with the Obscene Sailor. The last couple of weeks we've been talking about entering the dating scene, what are we looking for, when we find what we're looking for and we decide we want to take a relationship a little bit more permanent, some of the things that we need to do in order to do so in a safe and healthy way. And now we want to talk about what happens when we're sort of the relationship is settled and we're kind of chugging along, it's become a little bit long term. And how do we keep this going? And how do we spot when maybe there's problems arising? So, we talk a lot about this is nominally like self-defense, and a lot of people think about physical self-defense, but really we're talking here about emotional and mental self-defense, or self-defense of your being, of who you are, how to maintain yourself in the context of this new, permanent, hopefully happy relationship. So I think the first thing we wanted to talk about was communication skills. Um, Popular buzzword, I think, Lee.
I think that there is so much information and misinformation out there about communication skills, um, all under the guise of making people happier, better. Fix your relationship with these 3 questions, these 70 questions, whatever it is. That I think glosses over like the technical aspects of communicating and communicating intently, um, without harm, without malice, without hitting on things that maybe you don't know are difficult for your partner. Maybe your partner doesn't know is difficult for them. Um, but doing so in a manner that is productive to the relationship. And that's what's glossed over.
I mean, to me, the core of communication skills is really about being clear and honest, which is super hard, right? Like that, because that means you have to be clear and honest with yourself first. And uh, thank you, therapy. I realized I don't know myself as well as I thought I did. That's a thing. And then you have to be courageous enough to share that with another individual. Even if you've decided you want to share your life with them, there's also but do I really want to?
And preparing ourselves for answers that we maybe don't want. I every dude wants to hear that he's got the biggest tab A that his partner's had. Maybe you're not. And I use that as a really funny example, but hearing bad things from the person that we arguably care a lot about, we're building a life with them, preparing ourselves for that hit is honestly really difficult. No one wants to be told bad news, period. We
Mhm.
especially don't want it from our partner.
Yeah, and some of those conversations might seem like they were simple and turn out not to be. You can get, blindsided by a reaction or something else. So it's understandably scary, but still super important, because really the sooner you discover, I think, some incompatibility or some point of disagreement, the sooner you can manage it. Whether that means talking through it or getting comfortable with it, or deciding, what, this is just not okay.
And I think the really what we're skirting around without saying is how do we compromise our life with a partner in a manner that means that everybody's happy. um and that can be from big picture, do we want kids, do we not want kids, to the mundane of, okay, what time do we get up in the morning? And a lot of that is left unstated because we're not told to want to have that conversation. We're not told that we should have that conversation of what do Saturdays look like? What time do we get out of bed?
Mhm. We kind of fall into those patterns, and it, it's not even, I think, that we're trained not to want them. It's we're trained to not realize that having them is even a thing. You say, "Oh, when do we get out of bed in the morning?" I'm like, I don't think I've ever heard of having a conversation, scary word, about that. but it's something that you have to navigate, and you might notice it, let's face it, the first couple of months you live with somebody, this stuff is easy.
The first couple months of the newlywed syndrome of the first year you're going to have the most sex that you're going to have in the rest of your relationship. You're going to, all gets really hyped up. The first couple months, the first year, the first couple years are the easy bits, which is to me why we should be laying that groundwork in the first couple months.
Hmm.
Um, you know, I, I'm somebody who's up at 6 a.m. to use the getting out of bed as an example. I know, there's something wrong with me. I'll go see a doctor. But I'm up at 6 a.m. and I distinctly remember being awake for hours while my ex and while other partners have been laying in bed, you know, because Saturdays are for sleeping in. Now let's get stuff done so we can take a nap and then we can get more stuff done. Like that's how I'm wired. And if we have that conversation 3 months in while I'm still endearing and, somebody that they like, we're in way better of a place than a year and a half down the road as, they come out of the bedroom with a glare that's pointed at me because it's 6:30 in the morning and I'm making breakfast and I'm being loud and I'm, listening to music because it's time to start the day. Um, Relationship capital. I only get to influence my partner so much, and the cost of different things happens at different aspects of like different time frames within the relationship. The things that you can get in the first 6 months are remarkably different from 6 years in as far as the cost of it and the toll on the relationship.
Yeah,
Um,
and obviously we change over time. I used to be a much more early riser than I am these days. And, thank you work from home for taking the commute out of my morning so I could sleep in a little bit more. But the whole, like having those conversations early and figuring it out early helps you be in a better place when things change and you go, hey, like I got to start getting up earlier now, or now it's starting to bug me a little that you're sleeping in so much. But if I know from earlier when we're all happy and when it's shiny and happy, then that resentment isn't as big. Or when things change, it's like, oh, I understand why. And I know, actually, I know she hates getting up early. So I'm going to
and
support her in a different way instead of being, "Rah, rah," she's being loud in the morning. They can't know that if you're not talking about it.
of course, it's easier to have a conversation again, um, vice having it for the first time.
Hmm.
It is way easier to go, hey, so that thing that we talked about 6 months ago, whatever aspect of the relationship that was discussed, it's way easier when you know that you're not going to get a bombshell dropped on you to rehash that conversation, um, particularly on contentious issues, money, kids, family, um,
How clean the house is.
how clean the house is. Are you sleeping with other people? It's
Hmm.
2021 and things are weird. Like, it's way easier to have those conversations again after you've had it.
Yeah.
So start that early.
Yeah, I think
Um,
there's a little less emotional baggage, right? Because you're not as afraid of it's going to turn out horribly. I mean, if it did the last time, maybe that's a sign, and we'll talk about red flags. But, it's that opportunity to go, it's that learning opportunity to go, hey, we had that really, what I thought was going to be a really tough talk, and it went okay. Let's do it again.
and building that common ground.
Hmm.
If I am looking for a difficult subject, I think it's important to start. Step one is find the common ground between the two parties.
Hmm.
I, making this series as an example. Hey, we both have a lot of interest, and this has been really important to both of us over the last 2 years. Let's do some content on it. Okay, that's a gigantic common ground, and then we just work out the specifics.
Yep.
Um, in the case of making the house clean, okay, we both want the house to be clean. We just have different standards about it, how can we accommodate both of our standards?
Yep.
Um,
I think there's, when we were discussing this episode earlier on, we talked a lot about things like, how do we learn those communication skills? How do we learn to be creative about that conflict resolution? You talked about preemptive therapy. And I can't tell you how many people I've told now, have you thought about couples therapy?
oh yeah. And to be honest, it is something that, I mentioned in previous episodes that my divorce was avoidable. My divorce was avoidable. I just didn't know it at the time because 2 years prior to it starting, we needed to go to couples therapy and we needed to work on communication skills. She and I both had avoidance issues. And, I thought blindly, oh hey, we're not arguing. We've never raised our voices at one another. We're doing great. Like we're so much better than everybody else. Wrong. um, the preemptive fixing of problems from an applied violence standpoint, we look at the work we do prior to needing to engage with somebody, the management of unknown contacts, building space, building articulation, as being really important to the final outcome of the evolution or the event. Um, it's the exact same, if not stronger, in relationships. And getting that impartial third party is, I think, the best way to go about that.
And, I think that too, if you're not ready for that for whatever reason, because you have this idea that this is only for couples that aren't doing well, or you have financial or practical limitations for doing it, or, that itself is too heavy of a conversation to have, then it's not as if we're not in the golden age of really good resources for learning communication skills, for doing exercises together, to to learn that communication, to practice it, to work on it. In fact, we're even in an age where, what, maybe the way to do this is you're going to leave emails to each other, leave letters to each other. There's a lot of ideas out there, and that's one thing that's great now is, okay, therapy isn't for you. I mean, I think it can be. I've certainly, individual therapy helps everybody, but um, if that's not available to you for whatever reason, then there's online resources, there's books, there's support areas that can help you go, well, how do I use journaling to help articulate my own thoughts so that I can articulate them to my partner? Or how can I use letters? Or how can what does nonverbal communication look like versus verbal communication, so I can be ensure that I'm giving the right message and that I'm receiving the right message, and I can call out gently when I'm not understanding what I'm getting.
So, something that you and I discussed as we were working through the agenda for this episode is the non-vocal cues and the indications of our partner's emotional state. Again, making that callback to the applied violence, physical security side, understanding the physiological response our partners are going to have as we discuss very difficult, you know, is this the end of the relationship questions, understanding the fight or flight process that they're going through. What does your partner freezing look like?
Mm-hmm.
You just dropped something that is entirely novel to them in their lap and went, hey, engage with me. um they're gonna freeze. I know, I've done it way more than once, because you get a ticking bomb handed to you and your partner's already done the emotional work to build to having that conversation. um as we talk about resources for counseling, I would be remiss in not saying that I really enjoy the work of the Gottman Institute.
Okay.
Um, they were my introduction to that physiological aspect of communication and relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that they're a fantastic resource. Their book is like $10 on Amazon and very, very much worth it.
I'll drop a link in this week's comments once I get it from you. But Yeah, I think that, that's important piece of communication skills that we gloss over is we talk a lot about, the outgoing communication. What are we expressing? What are we showing? But how do you read that other person? And this is actually a really great segue into something that we wanted to talk about too in terms of red flags. Because, how well do you understand that other person's reactions? If they're freezing, like, is that a rejection, or is that a, I need to process this, I'm not ready, as you say, I'm not ready for this conversation yet, I've never thought about it, or this is really scary to me to admit to you what I think about it, because I didn't expect it, like, over this dinner in this restaurant at this moment. I imagined this conversation in some other time and place, and being able to tell that's what your partner is doing, or for anybody who has a traumatized partner, understanding sometimes when you've triggered them and they're not responding to you, they're responding to a trigger that you might have inadvertently touched at, and being able to read that and go, they're not angry at me. They're angry at this thing that they've experienced out there, and we need to reset and revisit this conversation later. So being able to read your partner and read the words that they're saying and read the actions that they're giving you is also a communication skill that we really need to work on.
And how we reconnect after a difficult conversation, a difficult moment, is just as important to communication.
So make up
If
sex, right?
Well, yeah, obviously, like just full blown, the screaming "I hate you" the entire time. Like, I'm prone to getting my face pushed into the pillow during it and like held there a little too long. But whatever works for the couple. That reconnection, of all things for me, it is if you're going to tell me bad news and you're my partner, hold my hand. Like, I don't care. We can handle a whole lot of things together if we're together. You can tell me that you were sleeping with my best friend. Hold my hand while you do it, and we stand a much better chance of me not getting angry or hurt because there's that connection there.
Mm-hmm.
Learning what each person needs as far as that reconnection is, I think, really one of the best skills that we can hammer down, because past traumatized partners, if you drop something that falls along past trauma, your partner may be packing their bags in their head going, okay, I've got to grab this out of that place because that's what they had to do before. Um,
Literally, it's not you, it's them.
and that is a valid thing that we joke about when we're 20, but not at 20 anymore. No, that is something that we have to navigate.
And I think that, when you know those things about your partner and you choose to ignore them anyway, that really to me is the core of the red flag, right? We've joked so much everywhere about red flags. I think, I'm surprised that you don't just receive random red flags in the mail sometimes,
I,
especially
well,
you.
yeah, I was to say that's bold of you to assume that I don't.
um, like little red
Little
pennants.
soccer
Yeah,
card red flags with X's names on them. Yeah,
yeah.
I've got some friends who are just reminding me of where I've gone wrong, and I appreciate it because that's how we grow.
But sometimes we talk about X is a red flag. I was mentioning earlier, there's a TikTok video that's been floating around where bride and groom at the wedding, and she, does a cute little cake smear on him, and he steps back, and then he just like throws the entire cake at her, and it knocks her over, and she goes stumbling. And she put it on TikTok because she thought it was really funny. And the internet is in an uproar about it, saying you need to divorce him. This is a giant red flag about your relationship. And I'm going, I don't know, is she into that? Because if
Red,
she's not into that and she did it and he did it anyway, that is a red flag. Absolutely. Hands down. But if
and if
that's how they food fight,
she's not into it, and he didn't know, and they had a meaningful conversation about it afterwards, does that red flag go away? I think it kind of has to if that was a expectation that was never articulated.
and if it
Um,
was, is it part of a continuing pattern of, if there's a continuing pattern of things he doesn't know or that one partner doesn't know, that's a sign, especially when you're at your wedding.
It, and there's going to be things that you find out about your partner years in, and
Yeah.
not bad things that they're keeping hidden, but what do you mean you had, you have another sister that I've never met?
What was your hobby in high school?
Exactly.
Like, how
D&D
nerdy
club.
were you in high
Yeah,
school?
D&D club for life. Woo. There are things that you're going to learn about your partner. Some of them may be things that if a person listed on their Tinder profile, you would go, nope, not interested. But you have a relationship that trumps that red flag. That's not bad until it's a systemic abuse of the trust and confidence in the relationship.
And there are certain things that are considered universal red flags that I go, yeah, but. And it's very tricky to do that. And it's tricky to have those conversations because, one of the biggest ones, I look a lot at the problem of women dying in domestic violence. And one of the biggest markers of that is your partner strangles you. That is indeed a potentially really, really bad sign. However, some people are into that and we don't kink shame around here. So if that's what you're into, then it's not he strangles you, she strangles you, that's a red flag. It's he strangles you, she strangles you, you didn't want to be, they kept doing it. They're not doing it in a way that you have consented to, that you have told them to. They're not reading your signs of your discomfort with a thing that they should know is potentially uncomfortable. Like if you're getting it on and he decides to add a little spice or she decides to add a little spice and do a little strangle and you're giving off all the body language in the world of this is not okay, whether or not you say it, and they keep doing it, that's a problem. Yes. If you're like, oh God, this is amazing, maybe you need to have that conversation later because there's some dangers involved. But that's not it's a red flag because they put their hands around your throat, period. It's a red flag because this is the kind of thing that can be really bad and you need to set some parameters around it and have some communication around it. And if they're not respecting where you land on it, it's a really big red flag.
And again, communication. You have to be able to, we all have things that scare us to share, and especially scare us to share in a non situationally appropriate time frame. It We have all been with that person who we're in bed with them and they start laying out their laundry list of things that you want to do. Let's have that conversation over brunch and a mimosa at 7 a.m., not in the heat of the moment. Because if I pull back and go, nope, that's a line too far, in the moment of like you're in bed with this person, that rejection hurts a whole lot more than at the dining room table at 7 a.m. with a mimosa in hand going, okay, let's have a conversation about that.
Yeah. And then it's, figuring out too, what are when is it a conflict too far? And when is it a conflict that you can find some kind of resolution to that is agreeable to both of you? Kind of stepping out of the bedroom a little bit. One of my favorites is clean, like how clean is your home? Like what is the level of slob at which you can live with? And how do you, does that become a deal breaker? And for some people it is, like it really is. And for some people they go, I can live with this, and they both just kind of find a middle ground. And for some people they go, we're hiring a cleaning service, and then that takes this fight out of the equation. But it's figuring out, okay, is this the fight? Is this the fight that ends it, or is this a fight that we can find a solution to? Even children, which is one of the biggest deal killers in relationships for people, sometimes there is a middle ground. Sometimes the middle ground is we'll adopt, or we're going to really put a ton of time into community service that serves children and young populations. Or sometimes it really is, I want a child of my body. But how do you distinguish that? And it still comes down to that back and forth communication and how far are we pushing? Does it become a red flag when they cheat on their birth control? That's ignoring your boundary there. It's not that she wants a kid that's a red flag. It's that she's ignoring the fact that you don't.
That one, um, thank God for vasectomies. Men, it's worth it if you're in team no kids. Compromising without losing yourself. As you're building a relationship with someone, and this stage of the relationship is a year in, 10 years in, ongoing as long as the relationship exists, your sense of self is going to change because of that person.
That's
And
a beautiful thing sometimes.
I it, I think it genuinely, and this is my romantic showing through, please don't tell anybody. I think it genuinely makes us better human beings to have that kind of long-term commitment, that long-term building with another person, because it makes us grow in ways that we never would have expected, in ways that we never ever would have grown without them. And not just because they're somebody new, but because that responsibility is real, and that responsibility is the only thing that can make us grow in that regard. Um, but it has to be a compromise. It cannot be an assumption of, oh, well, you're going to do this. Um,
It's like
none of,
the friend problem, right? Your friends from the before times, before you became an aunt, before you became a plus one. The compromise of how much time do you get to spend with them? Do they spend time with you as a couple or just you alone? How do you navigate that?
and what is the difference between a disagreement and a red flag? Manipulation. I would be ignoring a whole lot of my dating history to not say that manipulation is the key, is the disconnect, and the we can have a knockdown drag out disagreement about something.
Hmm.
It's when there's not connection as a couple that it starts to become manipulation. If it's us versus the world, it may not mean that the relationship's going to last forever. It becomes a red flag when it's my partner is playing me to get what they want. Um,
Which, yeah, I don't really have anything to add to that. I Lee made me speechless.
I not the first time in this series.
Well, I really like that kind of to wrap this
Yeah,
because it all comes down to that communication piece, and the breakdown of the communication is the red flag, and the work that we put into communication is how we resolve conflicts, how we keep ourselves, how we maintain that sense of self as part of a couple, how we do all of this. And then when it breaks down, and I think this is what we wanted to do as we kind of wrap this whole series, is okay, now that it's over, you know, what happens after none of this works anymore, and how does this impact, all the work that we put in, all the investment we put in, all the capital we put in at this point in the relationship determines everything afterwards too. So, any final words here? This is a hard one.
well, yeah, and the biggest recommendation, having made the mistake, having let my concerns get in the way, go to couples counseling. Find a good couples counselor. Find someone who is well versed in the science and not just the feel good top 100 questions to ask your partner to make your marriage better.
You can do that.
Find
You're on your own.
exactly. Not paying a bill an hour for um, find a good counselor, even if you think you don't need it, because you don't know what next year is going to hold. Be it in the case of a very dear friend of ours, the death of a child, the death of a family member. You don't know what next year is going to hold. If you build that communication skill now, you're not going to regret that investment. And it means you get more return.
Yeah, absolutely. Then we'll be back next time around for, I don't want to say when this doesn't work. Sometimes because this works is why a relationship doesn't last as a couple, but that doesn't always mean that the relationship doesn't last as a connection between two people. So maybe that's a little bit of a hopeful note. And until next time.